are now recording. So if we think about what we're doing here in this course of the African oral tradition, right? We started off the course kind of detailing who are African people. We got into a little bit of the moral grounding of what the society of Kemet was operating under with the reading of the oldest book in the world. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of the moral compass that guided the Kemetic society with this reading on Ma'at, right? And we'll jump into this little excerpts of the introduction. Again, you guys didn't have this available to you, but I think it's going to be very helpful as it pertains to what Karenga wants to do with this project of investigating Ma'at. So what he says is the essential thrust and purpose of this work is to delineate and critically examine Ma'at. Now, delineate just means to like draw a line of distinction, right? To kind of separate from two different things. The moral ideal of ancient Kemet using the Declaration of Innocence and the New Kingdom text, the book coming forth by day, and other key ethical texts as the foundation, as the fundamental foci. And when he says foci, he just means focus, right? As the fundamental foci for analysis. And in the process, explore the usefulness of Ma'atan ethical thought as a resource for modern moral discourse and philosophic reflection on critical moral issues, right? So essentially what he wants to do is to draw a very clean and clear definition of what this idea of this notion of Ma'at is, right? And in doing so, we want to provide a resource for moral discourse, right? So conversations around morality, right? And the philosophic reflection on critical moral issues. So it's really about this idea of morals, right? But he wants to take this conversation of morals into our current 2021 time. And he wants to, see how the Kemetics went about this idea of morals through the concept of Ma'at and see how we could apply those concepts to what we're doing today, right? So this is the desire, this is what Karenga wants out of the book. So the chapter or the portion that you guys read was Ma'at, the conceptual idea. So it's designed to give you a conception around this notion of Ma'at. I'm going to start on page 5, looking at the top paragraph in page 5 towards the middle. And it says, actually, this conceptual elasticity. Does anybody not know what he means when he says the elasticity or how he's using that? Okay, thank you, Yeshayu, for being honest. So let me ask you guys, what does elastic do? When you think about elastic, what do you think about? What is the purpose of elastic?
Isn't it something like stretchy?
Exactly. Hit the nail on the head. It's something that can stretch, right? So if you think about what he's saying as it pertains to Ma'at, actually this conceptual elasticity, right? So he's talking about Ma'at being able to be elastic, right? There's elasticity to Ma'at. So what do you think that means?
So is he saying that like you could take it in any way, like you could stretch it into, you could make it into any way you wish to?
Yep, absolutely. So it could be morphed, it could be impressed upon, it could be shaped, right? It's elastic, it could be stretched and pulled. So actually, this conceptual elasticity, which at first glance might seem problematic. Okay, so this is a philosophical text. This is philosophy that we're reading, right? One thing about philosophy and reading philosophy, you must know what the argument is, okay? Think about our journals. What is your first section of your journal? What are you supposed to be detailing your first paragraph, your first bullet point in the journal?
The
That's a
problem.
thesis.
The problem in the thesis, absolutely. Or in philosophical context, what is the argument that the author is arguing, right? So right here, I'm going to kind of give you guys an example on how to read an argument, okay? So the first claim in the argument is that the elasticity of Ma'at can be viewed as problematic. And when he says problematic, it just can be viewed as a problem, right? So this is the first claim. So we have to also understand the difference between an argument and then a counter argument. When I say counter argument, what do you guys think that means?
Something against what you're saying, so then you could rebound it. Basically, you're going against yourself, but then you back yourself up.
Right. Or going against another author, right? So you may use another author's argument in your work, and you're using it for a counter argument, right? So things that make you aware or attentive to counter arguments are statements like however, right? So for example, a lot of people on the right viewed Trump's presidency as a success. However, the majority of society viewed Trump as a bigot and a racist, right? So you see how there's the argument that Trump's presidency was a success, but it's followed up by however, which is going to present my counter argument of him being a bigot and a racist, right? So this is how these counter arguments play out. However is always one good indicator of a counter argument. But on this passage, he doesn't say however, but he says on deeper inquiry, right? So looking a little bit deeper, then we know that we're going to get the counter argument. On deeper inquiry proves promising due to what Moran's, this is another thing. So for me, one of the issues with this text, with this passage and the way that it's written is the citations. I think the citations really break up the flow of his argument because you're going through what he's arguing and then you get a last name, a bracket, a year, and a number, right? So you have to kind of decipher all that information to kind of get you back to the argument. I'm not gonna lie, that's confusing and it takes away from the actual text itself, right? But this is what it is. The last name, so remember how Trisha said, which you're arguing, and I said, or with another author is arguing, right? So that last name lets you know that this is another author that Karenga is using in his argument, right? We had the parentheses that let you know what year the text was produced, followed by a comma, and then the number 16. The number just lets you know this is the page number that this passage was found on, right? So kind of let's take it all back from the beginning. Actually, this conceptual elasticity, which at first glance might seem problematic, on deeper inquiry proves promising due to what Morin's 1984, page 16, calls, and then we have in quotation, calls Ma'at's, then in quotation, rich treasury of meaning. So we know what is ever inside that quotation is what his name, Morin's is stating, right? That's what's being pulled from the text that Morin's wrote, that Karenga is using. For here, one encounters in Ma'at with Kua, again, another author. This time the book was written in 1978, page 138, defines as a pluralization, which allows for and encourages a wide range of thought and interpretations, right? So just to kind of simplify all that we read, right? Within that 5 lines is essentially what he's saying. Initially, people conceived Ma'at as something that's elastic, but they frame that elasticity as something that's problematic, right? But as you look closer, you know, in fact, that elasticity is not a problem. It allows for and it encourages a wide range of meanings, definitions, and interpretations, right? So essentially he says all that shit just to say that there's various ways that you could interpret and understand Ma'at, right? Simple, just so. And another thing with these dense texts, you gotta have to kind of pull things back and do away and kind of find out what he's really wanting to get at, right? So this is a very round and about way saying that there's various meanings and various definitions to what Ma'at is, right? So this is how he starts off the essay or the portion of the essay. So I'm going to page 6. I'm looking at our first initial paragraph here on page 6, our first full paragraph, excuse me. So he starts off this passage with the term, it's not starts off, it's and then there's the term etymology. Did anybody not know what etymology means? Did anybody have to look up? Thank you, Eshu, for being, SIU, for being honest again. So etymology is essentially just the root of a word, right? So it's getting the definition of the word by going back to its roots and going back to its origins, right? So he says the etymology of Ma'at, and then next to that, he has a comma, and then he has the various neter, or the hieroglyphics, as the Greeks called them, to kind of show you how Ma'at was depicted in Kemetic society, right? And he says, suggests an evolution from a physical concept of straightness, evenness, levelness, correctness, as the wedge-shaped glyph suggests. So he's talking about that glyph that kind of looks like that. It almost looks like an arm, right? It's that wedge-shaped glyph. So essentially saying that Ma'at was originally understood to be something that physically represents straightness, levelness, rightness. So if you think about a ruler, right? What does a ruler does? It makes sure something is straight, right? So in its original conception, a ruler could be the embodiment of Ma'at because it's straight, right? If you think about a tool that's called the leveler to make sure that when you hang a picture, it's level, right? That also could be in its original conception, a personification of Ma'at, right? So it's something that makes sure the physical, the tactile is straight and right and correct, right? That's how it originally was conceived. To a general concept of rightness, including the ontological and ethical sense of truth, justice, righteousness, order. In a word, the rightness of things, right? So it evolved from the physical representation of things being straight, right? Again, thinking about rulers, thinking about levelers, and to this concept of rightness, including the ontological and ethical sense, truth and justice, right? Order, and in a word, the rightness of things. So for things to be done the right way would be considered Ma'at. That's how Ma'at evolves, right? Okay. So I'm moving on to page 7. And again, we're going to start with the first full paragraph here on page 7. He goes on to note that in addition to Ma'at as an epistemological or philosophical ideal, a moral ideal, and a metaphysical ideal. Okay, so epistemological, they're just telling you it's like a philosophical ideal, right? It's just you kind of pick up on the parentheses. A moral ideal, again, something to guide your morals, right? A metaphysical idea. So another way to think about metaphysics is to think about the spirit, right? Spirit is something that's beyond the physical, right? It can't be seen, it can't be touched, it can be felt, but it's not a physical phenomenon, right? So that's what he means by metaphysical. It is, in a real sense, also an ecological ideal. So when you think about ecology, you have to think about like nature, right? Think about how nature will be impacted. That's what he means when he says ecology. Inasmuch as the ideal of Ma'at opposes all enterprises which tend to destroy the cosmic order, nature, and thereby commits itself to the future or destiny of humanity, right? So one way to know that you're out of alignment with Ma'at is to defile or be ill-intended towards nature, right? So this whole notion of global warming that we're experiencing in our current time, that would never exist in the Ma'at society, because part of the Kemetic society is to be in one and to be in alignment with nature, right? Not to conquer nature, but to exist with nature. And if you think about a lot of your indigenous cultures, that was something that's very a core component of indigenous culture, is to be in one with nature, right? To be in harmony with nature. And I'm talking about, when I say indigenous, no, I'm talking about people who were on this land prior to Europeans coming over and taking the land over, right? So people who may identify as Mexican, people who may identify as South American, people who may identify as what we may call Native Americans, right? Those are the indigenous people of this land, right? That was a core component, that you were in harmony with nature. African societies are built around being in harmony with nature. It's only within the West or within European societies that they have this idea to dominate and to conquer nature, right? Out of pocket with Ma'at. So a little bit lower on the page, like around here towards the bottom, he provides us with the 4 domains of Ma'at, right? The universal domain, which is Ma'at, the totality of order existence, and represents things in harmony and in place. So again, if you think about the universe, right? So how Ma'at fits within the universal is everything in the universe being aligned and being in place, right? The stars being placed in perfect position, right? The way that the earth rotates on its axis at a perfect speed, right? Everything in the universe is perfectly and divinely aligned. So that's how the Ma'at applies to the universal, right? The political domain, so how politics are ordered, right? So Ma'at is justice and in an opposition to injustice, right? So how politics are ordered in a Kemetic society, which is governed by Ma'at, is just, right? So We only concerned about a law if that law promotes justice. In our society, right, how laws, you guys know how laws get passed in our society? No? Have you heard of the term lobbying? Go ahead, Trisha. Go ahead.
Well, I figured it'd go to the three branches, no?
Something like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I don't know though.
no, it's cool. So even for it to go to those branches of government, it has to be placed on the table first, right? And typically, for it to be placed on the table to be in conversation of becoming a law, you have to lobby. And all that lobbying is, well, there's two forms of lobbying, right? There's effective lobbying and there's ineffective lobbying. Ineffective lobbying is going to your state capital, going up to Sacramento and producing signatures saying that I have X amount of people who support this law, right? That's lobbying. That's one form of lobbying. The effective form of lobbying is having those signatures and also a nice envelope with maybe $10,000 in it to make sure that that law gets placed on the books, right? So that's how this society initiates laws. Not really concerned too much with justice. If you have the money to put it on the table, you have the signatures to support it, then we'll do what we have to do to get it on the books. That's not how things worked in Kemet, right? If that was just, then it will become law, right? We oppose anything that could be perceived as unjust, right? So that's how the political order was governed in Kemetic society. So that's the political. The social, right? So how individuals within the society interact with one another. The social domain, which is the focus on right relation and duty in the context of community, right? So it's not just about you, you have a duty to your larger community, right? You have a duty to your family. You have a duty to your neighbors, right? You have a duty to your neighborhood. You have a duty to your ethnic nationality or ethnic community, right? There's a duty that you have to those outside of yourself, right? And then they also touch on the personal domain, in which following the rules and principles of Ma'at is to realize concretely the universal order in oneself, to live in harmony with the ordered whole. So one, you have to order and recognize the order within you, right? In order to allow you to be in harmony with the universe. So even the personal is not really solely personal, right? It's personal with the purpose of being in alignment with and interacting with in a harmonious way, the universe, and by and large, society as a whole. So these four domains, the universal, the political, the social, and the personal, they all interact with one another and they all intersect with one another. Okay. So on page 8, yeah, on page 8, towards the middle of the page, first full paragraph, it says Ma'at as a principle and a force constitutive of creation itself comes to mean then an order of rightness which permeates existence and gives life. So it's saying this essence of how life is produced, as how life is created, is Ma'at, right? I don't know the exact number, right? But if you think about it, it's millions of sperm cells that have to travel to the egg for somebody to get pregnant, right? That's a divine order. That's not by happenstance that this human life is created, right? So the Kemetics would argue that even that process is Ma'at, right? Because it gives and it produces existence and permeates life. We have Morin's, same author as before, states in quotation marks, Ma'at is right order in nature and society as established by the act of creation, and hence means according to context, that it was right, what is correct, law, order, justice, and truth. Athens, another author, also stresses the centrality of Ma'at as a divinely constituted order, right? So this notion of Ma'at, it comes from the divine, it comes from God, it comes from the Most High, right? And then we'll end my portion with, on pages 10, again, first full paragraph. The key point of this discussion, then, is that the practice of Ma'at is conceived and carried out within the worldview, which links the divine, the natural, and the social. Again, think about those domains, right? But they're saying these three particular domains, the divine, the most high God, right? The natural nature and the social society. These three domains are interrelated, interactive, and mutually affective. And that's not effective with an E, but affective with an A, right? And a Ma'atan person understands this and acts accordingly, as the history of the idea of Ma'at, which is presented below, demonstrates. So I'm going to kind of take this notion that we just read here, right? The divine, the natural, and the social. And I'm going to kind of explain to you guys how that comes into play in real time in Kemetic society. So I'm going to share my screen and show you guys an image, and then I'll make this all make sense. So you guys see this image here? You see the scales, the baboons. Okay, so the woman in white here, that is Ma'at. You notice there's a feather on top of her head. There's a feather up here on top of this as well, right? This individual here, this is a man who is he's being judged before he transitions into the afterlife. For those who are familiar with the Catholic tradition, it may be familiar or similar to this notion of purgatory, right? You're like in waiting to see if you're going to heaven or to hell. But what's happening in this context, this individual here is stating the 42 confessions of Ma'at, or the 42 confessions of innocence. I have not killed. I have not stole. I have not committed adultery, right? And what Ma'at is doing as he states these 42 confessions, this is her right here in one scale, which really is not, what's important is not per se her, but the feather, right? So some images is just the feather, some images it's her, but really what they want to symbolize is that feather. On the other scale is the individual's heart, right? So what they're doing is, as he makes the 42 confessions, they're weighing his heart with the feather. And as if his heart is lighter than the feather, then he's able to successfully transition to the afterlife, or what we may understand as heaven, right? But as he states those 42 confessions and he's either not telling the truth, or he's not able to state them in a way that is believable, or he says, you know what, I have killed, I have murdered, I have stolen, then at that point, his heart will be heavier than a feather, and he won't be able to successfully navigate his way to the afterlife, right? So if we think about the passage that we just read, it mentions how the divine, the natural, and the social all interact. And we see that play out here, because for you to successfully navigate yourself to the afterlife, for your heart to be light as a feather, you have to, one, follow a divine order, right? You have to, two, be in harmony with nature. And you have to, three, be at harmony with the society, with those who you interact with on a daily basis. And if you could do that, then you should be able to successfully state the 42 confessions of Ma'at. Your heart will be lighter than a feather. Your heart will be lighter than a feather, and then you would be able to successfully navigate yourself to the afterlife, right? So that's how this concept of Ma'at plays out in real time in the Kemetic society. So at this point, we're going to kick off our fishbowl. So for the fishbowl, you could use your journals. You could use anything I mentioned in the conversation I just had. You could use what was discussed in your breakout groups. Whatever you find of interest is totally up to you. Remember, you have to do 2 fishbowls per semester. You have 1 time to pass without penalty. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer for the fishbowl? Okay, Ishaul, I got you. Is there anyone else who wants to volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
Okay, Angelica.
I'll volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, I got Pamela, and there was one more, and Zara. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Pamela, and last one, Zara. All right, so I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna let y'all go ahead and take over the conversation. Whoever wants to start, you can kick it off.
I'll start. So what I took away like from the reading, I thought it was like just much more than religion. Like I saw it more as like a guide on how to be good within, not only within yourself, but like with nature and also spiritually. And I thought that unlike, well, I'm Catholic and my family is Catholic, and I think that like that religion is very strict, and unlike the, wow, with the reading and what I took away from that was that it wasn't like that. It was just how to be a good person to yourself and to others. And yeah.
Yeah, going off of what she said, I looked at it in the same kind of way because it was kind of stated that there was no like set definition of what it meant, but it was more of like how you interpreted it, and there was no wrong or right way to do that because it wasn't like a rule book like you do this, do that, or this. It's more of a framework of like all the endless possibilities of what you could do and how to achieve ideal achievement within yourself and within nature and all of that. And I found it like really interesting because I didn't really look at it in like a really religious point of way. I did look at it that way, but I looked at it more of like a literary type of way where like a poem or something because you could like really break it down into anything that you could see it as, and it's not wrong or it's not right because there's no set way of how to interpret it.
Angelica, wow. Your interpretation is really, really profound. A couple of things I think that you mentioned that's really important. I don't want anybody to miss, right? You said it's not a rule book, but it's a framework, right? Could you kind of articulate for us the distinction you draw between a rule book and a framework? Like, what's the difference between the two?
Well, like a rule book for me is like let's say like the Ten Commandments, but a framework it's more like there's more room for you to do like, well, not for you to do, it's like a framework of like, oh, this is like a suggestion and you take it as you want and you do with it what you can and want to do, and that's on you.
Perfect, thank you. We're actually going to come back to this idea of the 10 Commandments once we complete our fishbowl, because I really want to dive a little bit deeper into that because you bring up a really good point. Next.
I was gonna go off of what Angelica said about the Ten Commandments. As she had stated before, as a Catholic myself, I do follow like the Bible, like you shouldn't kill, you should obey your parents and everything. And in the 42
Confession.
statements, yeah, reflections that were stated on in the reading, it gives us like a passageway, like or a structure of what we shouldn't do. Like if you do this, your soul would not be as heavy, and you could make it into like the gateway of heaven or hell. Like if you do this, and like it's looking at the Bible, the Catholic Bible or Christian Bible, like it's a testimony of if you do this, you're going to hell right away, or if you don't do this, you'll go to heaven. But looking at this structure, it's not like that. It's like a suggestion of what you shouldn't do.
Next one.
The way I made sense of the reading was I kind of divided into three parts, and it's like there's like three readings to it. So like the first part, I kind of took it as like there isn't an exact definition to my, but they kind of have the same ideas of as in one has to live in a life based on truth, justice, righteousness, and order. And then the second part, I took it as it's like a set. It's like to me, it's like a longer version of the Ten Commandments. And like you gotta live like a certain way to consider yourself living the Ma'adian. I don't know if I said it right. There you go. Thank you. And how it's like if you follow that, you're kind of living in a life of you're living a good life and being a worthy person. If you don't, then you're not living that same. It's like a lifestyle in a way.
Yeah. So what Shaul demonstrated, right, is the perfect analysis, right? So he kind of laid out for us his method on how he engaged this text, and I really appreciate that. And sidebar conversation, right? Like So as I mentioned to y'all, like I'm in a PhD program, right? And a lot of the stuff that we will be engaging is pulled from my PhD program. This isn't, like, they're not gonna talk about this type of shit in no PhD program. But the level of difficulty of the reading is very much aligned with PhD level material, right? And it's funny because every time I assign this and I think about assigning, it's always like a tension that I have within me. It's like, man, is this going to be too much for them? Will they be lost? And I always tell myself to rely on my pedagogical structure, right? Like on how I go about my teaching. Let that be my guide, right? And 10 times out of 10, I have experiences like what you guys just gave, right? Like, you showed how you were able to break this down. You showed how you were able to make sense of this, right? And it's profound, and nothing's lost on you guys, right? So one, it's a teaching moment for me as a professor, and to continue to challenge you guys as whole, as, you know, all students, right? To kind of stretch your intellectual capacity. And then two, it should be something that you guys should be attentive to in the space of, yo, there's nothing that's beyond my reason or beyond my ability to comprehend, right? It's really just about taking time and engaging the material, right? So let this kind of be a confidence booster for you guys as you go throughout the rest of the semester. What you're dealing with and how you're analyzing what you're dealing with is high level theory. And you guys are dealing with this at a high level. So be fair, be very confident and sound in that fact. I shit you not, there's people in my classes, in my PhD class, who couldn't understand this. Like I can't, like, no cap, like they would not get it. You know what I'm saying? And I hear it and I see it every day. And I often say students within Cal State LA have stronger critical thinking muscles than people who come out of like UCLA, out of USC, because I'm in classes with these motherfuckers and they don't understand basic concepts, right? So I think you guys should really be proud of yourselves and your intellectual ability. But what I do want to do, because Arya and Angelica, they mentioned the 10 Commandments, right? And especially the way that the distinction that Angelica drew in the sense of being a framework and being a like a rule book, right? So let's think about how these are phrased. So how are the 10 Commandments phrased? What are the phrasing of the 10 Commandments?
They're kind of phrased like one shall not kill, one shall not commit adultery.
You
and like this
shall
one,
not, right?
yeah. And this one's saying like I. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So how are the 42 confessions phrased? What is the terminology within those confessions?
They all have I in them.
Yeah, they all have I, but it's not a shall, right? It's I have not, right? What's the difference between you shall not and I have not? Where's that distinction fly? Think temporal, right? And when I say temporal, I just mean time. Think about the space of time, past, present, future. Yep, there you go, Trisha. That's it. So which one is in the past? Which one is in the past, Trisha, and which one's in the future?
The one in the past would be have, right?
Yep.
And then because shall was like it's gonna happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Angelica's point about rule books, right? A rule book will say you shall not kill someone, right? But the framework says I have not. I live by the laws and that guide our moral register, right? And I have not done these things because I follow the framework, right? So yeah, like there's this thing that you get pulled to the afterlife, right? And I'll show you one more time. So like, for example, you see in this picture, actually these two pictures. So like this character here, and then the Anubis, if you don't successfully allow your heart to be lighter than the feather, then this Anubis and the jackal will snatch your ass up and take you to what we understand as hell, right? So like there is this concept of damnation, right? It's not all like, everybody's gonna be good. So it's there, but the way that a lot of our Western religions, Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, is really bent around the fear aspect, right? So here is not really trying to terrorize you into living right. It's like Trisha said, right? We're going to give you these foundations, we're going to give you these guides, and it's your choice on how you want to take part of them or not, right? But how you choose to take part will determine your afterlife, right? So I think this distinction between the past tense, the temporal, the idea of I have not versus I shall not is extremely important in the way that these two societies, one being ours and one being the Kemetic society, the way they operate and what they find of importance, right? It's a very large thing to command someone and say, I shall. But it's also something to say, I have, because you've already lived a life that is good, right? Also, in the framework of the Kemetics, they're taking account of what you did once you passed, right? Once you did, now you're going to come to atonement for what, all your activities. To whereas in the Christian and the Catholic religion, it's more so, this is what you better not do while you're living, right? So again, it's that commanding. Again, and it's even from a difference between the commandments and the confessions, right? So a commandment is really about somebody telling you what to do. A confession is about what I have done and me confessing what my activities and my actions were. So let's do this. Let's open up the conversation to the rest of the class. What I'm curious to hear are your guys' conversation that you had in the breakout groups around your questions for the article. And then, we could jump into any other things that you guys want to cover or address as well. So what are some of the questions that were discussed in the breakout rooms? And it could be anybody. So we could just volunteer, or I could just start calling names. It's up to y'all. Preferably somebody who we have not heard from before. All right, so Denise, I'm sorry, go ahead, who was that?
Oh, I was gonna share. I was just kind of hesitant because I actually read the wrong passage for today. But when I was with my group, I did hear from most of my group mates that it was a bit difficult to understand the reading. And I also experienced that as well. Even though I read the wrong one in the reading that I read, I did have to search up a few terms. And like, for example, when they talked about Ma'a, I didn't really know what it meant. But like now, as we went through it as a class, like I have a better understanding of it.
Natalia, what did you read?
I read the Kemetic Proverbs and Ma'a.
Okay. So they're kind of similar. You won't be too off base. But what within our conversation as a class, within your conversation with your breakout groups, what gave you the most clarity? Like, is there something somebody said in particular, or what gave you that aha moment? I get it now.
Well, I think that it's because what I read and like based off of what I heard about what the rest of the class read, I think they are both similar. And it's just, well, like how everyone mentioned, where it's not like a rule book, so it's kind of like Angelica said, it's like a framework, and then it's up to you whether you follow it or not. So it even makes like more sense, I guess, to what I was reading, because well, I just have more clarity basically like on the way that we can interpret it, where it's not necessarily like their rules, it's kind of like it's there for you and you decide what you do, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions that were posed in your breakout groups that you want to kind of bring to the class, or to me for that matter?
I just wanted like a comment of something like that I noticed, because compared to the other reading that we read, I feel like so far like all these religions are kind of similar to each other. Like they're not exactly the same, but the structure of it is similar, and like the things that they believe in, it's just like, I guess like the only difference would be like the gods that they believe in and how they kind of write out the rules and the commandments.
So let me, just for my clarification, Trisha, you're saying all the religions that we've read in this class, or really all
just in general, like even back, like seeing back then how they had all these like rules and like beliefs for social, because I feel like this is mostly also for social structure and to have something to believe in, and you don't even have to be religious, because even people that aren't religious follow these things.
Sure.
So I feel like in general it's just something for like society to have like a something to follow, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like for order. Yeah.
No, you're spot on, and I just wanted to get clarifications, just that way I'm not assuming what you mean. But like, if you guys want to do deeper research and deeper homework, right, you can hop on YouTube. I'm put in the chat because it's going to be hard to spell. You know, give me 1 second. I want to make sure I spell it right. That's right, Ashra. Okay. So the brother's name is Ashra Kwesi, right? You can hop on YouTube and just type his name in and see what you come across. Matter of fact, when we went through our first lecture of the semester and we watched like a little 10-minute video of a dude breaking down like all the hieroglyphics on the pyramid and what have you, that's Ashra Kwesi, right? And really a lot of his research centers around how all Western religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, anything that you could think of, he argues that it all stems from the Kemetic society, right? And he goes into historical accounts how when the Greeks and Romans came into Kemet and they started to understand what moved the society, right? And they started to get a little bit of knowledge. They took the books, they took the libraries, they took the information, took them back to Europe, tried to interpret them, and then they produced the Christianities, they produced the Catholicisms. So one way to understand it from the lens of Ashra Kwesi, right? All of our Western religions are, for lack of a better word, bastardized versions of what they were doing in the Kemetic society, right? So that's why Trisha is attentive to the line and the thread that can be drawn through all religions that can trace back to this Kemetic society and this Kemetic structure. So that's a very good point. Anybody else? Somebody we have not heard from? We have Kendra, we have Pamela, we have Denise, we have Galilee, we have Kayla, Carolina.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention, I did have a hard time with like the reading, but like listening to everybody else and like going in the breakout rooms, it did really better my understanding. Like Trisha was saying, I also did notice like that the similarities in religion and how they offer us, I guess, like the commandments, to follow. I also kind of related it to the Islam's 5 pillars, I think it is. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just think it's kind of like ironic that there's always like a disagreement within religions, but we kind of go like in the same direction, I guess. Yeah, and also I didn't really understand quite well like what Ma'at or who that was, but to my understanding now, she was almost like a godly figure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's safe to say.
Yeah, no, actually, she's very widely recognized as the goddess Ma'at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what you see the depictions of her, in the images that are shown, and even from the first lecture that I gave, right, the woman with the feather on her head, it's embodied as a goddess. It's also embodied as principles, right? Truth, justice, balance,
Mm-hmm.
order, harmony, reciprocity, and propriety. Those are the 7 principles of Ma'at, right? So you're absolutely correct in understanding it as a goddess or a deity, right? So you're not too far off.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, Galilee. So was it like the terminology that made the reading hard for you? Was it just the density of the way that it was written? Like, if you could pinpoint one thing that just made it opaque, what would you say it is?
Personally, I would say that it was like the citation that kind of threw me off.
Yeah.
It was just in random, and it kind of threw me off. But I'm glad that you mentioned like where it was coming from. It was like the author referring to other people.
Yeah. No, that shit is hella confusing. Yeah, that's very confusing. So like there's a variety of different citation formats, right? This book is written in APA format where they use those brackets that are very distracting in the author's last name. For me, I like what's called Chicago format because all you do is put like a number at the end, like a little small number at the end of wherever your citation is, and at the end of the essay, you have where that number details the reading, the author, et cetera, right? So it doesn't break up the flow of the reading. Another thing, I think it was Angelica, you were saying how it kind of reminds you of poetry. Yeah. So keep this in the back of your mind, everybody, because for next week's reading, This is what we'll be getting into. And when you said that, Angelica, I wrote down poetic, because what we'll be reading next week is a poetic. And it's the same foundation in the sense that there's multiple interpretations, right? You could kind of read, so somebody might read it and have one understanding, somebody else might read it and have another understanding. And it's not that anybody's wrong, it's just really about how you interpreted it and what you have access to for your analysis, right? So there's something to keep in mind as we go forward. Anybody else? Let's get 2 more comments before we call it a day. Preferably from somebody who we haven't heard from. It gave me comments, it could be questions, it could be, I don't like this, I disagree with this, anything, nothing's off the table.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the creation that was mentioned in the story. I just wanted to know, like, what did you refer by that? Was it the creation of like man in the sense of like God created man in out of clay in that way?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it how you said like the sperm and seed?
It's all, right? All creations, how God created man. It's not in the Kemetic sense, it's not the formation of clay. Trying to think of the story. I don't want to fuck it up, but essentially it's a deity that breathed life into beings, that gave them life, that made men and women be created. Also the elements coming together. So you have the Neters, which it represents like air, water, and then you have Sahu, I believe, what represents like the water and the land, and then they come together and mix to produce, the earth as we understand it to be. So their creation story is not like what we're familiar with as it pertains to, the Adam and Eve story, or man being shaped out of clay by God. This is really about energies being produced, and those energies coming together to produce creation, right? But to answer your question directly, it's both. It's any way that you understand creation to come forth, right? It could be from, like I mentioned, man and woman coming together to make baby, the creator or Abu Tala from Western African traditions coming together to make earth, man, and beings, right? It could be how nature was created. It could even be understood as art, right? Because if you think about art, that's a creative process as well, right? You painting on a canvas, that's creation. Music being created, that's creation. So anything that produces newness would qualify under that divine Ma'atan creation. Does that answer your question, Carolina?
Yes, thank you.
It's a good question. One more statement, one more question, one more comment. Who wants to close us out? Preferably someone we have not heard from. You could be shy or we could go home. It's up to y'all. It's not hard. Just say whatever's on your mind as it pertains to the reading.
I really enjoyed this reading overall because even though it was like more complex to understand, I liked having like a challenge presented to me, because I was just it wasn't something I've ever read before in any of my other courses or in high school, where my teachers would give us like different works from all over the world. So I think it was pretty cool in that way, because it's like a new experience that I'm pretty sure most of us haven't had before.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna get quite a few new experiences in this course this semester. I really try to problematize our natural, our normative understandings of what education should teach you and what you should learn, right? I truly try to go to the left of the left and pull new information. So for next week, let me share my screen. I'll pull up, give me 1 minute, let me get it pulled up and I'll show you guys what's due next week.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just making sure, like us like turning stuff in wise, is just the journals that we have to worry about,
For
or is it?
now.
Okay.
Yeah, and really, Trisha, you don't have to worry about turning anything in until your midterm. So when I collect your midterm, you'll submit your journals also. So.
Very cool. Thank you.
All right. So this is our Google Classroom site here. If we go under classwork, if we go under, is it? I think it might be, yeah, weeks 4 through 7. We're going to read Glissant, Poetics of Relation, the open boat. So Again, it's not a lot, but keep in mind it's a poetic, so it's not going to be like a straightforward argument. It leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So, you know, be willing to kind of play and just be reflective and you know, intellectually curious about what you're reading. Do your journals for that. I'm going to add, and I'll send out an email to everybody. We're going to have a fourth little component of your journal. It's just questions, right? And don't think about questions from, I don't understand this. This is what question I'm posing. Think about it from the 3 frameworks of questions that we started our conversation off with today, right? A question for clarification, a question for critique, a question for investigation. So start thinking about questions in those frameworks. And then your fourth component of your journal will be whatever questions you come up with, right? Again, being a good scholar is not about having all the answers, it's being able to pose inquisitive, provocative, and profound questions, right? So we're gonna kind of exercise our ability to question. Another thing, well, I'll start playing with you guys is being able to phrase statements and questions, right? And the reason why this becomes important, when you get higher up in academia, especially for those who want to go into grad school, what your professor will do is really challenge what you think you know, right? So if I think I know something really, really well, and I talk about this subject matter as if I know it very well, they're going to look for me to have holes in what I think I know, right? So an effective way to kind of counteract that or circumvent that is to pose what you know in a question, right? So then at that way, it's more an investigative opposed to stating something from the standpoint of supreme knowledge. Does that make sense? So, you know, keep that in the back of your mind. How that will play out is you'll say something and I may ask you, you know what, Tricia, rephrase that in form of a question. And I'll be demonstrating that as well, so you guys can kind of see how the importance of questions will shape your intellectual scholarship.
I feel like that's helpful because like when you try and explain something, I feel like you kind of start, well, me personally, I start getting mixed up with my words. So I feel like a question will kind of help shape it up better.
Yep, and what it will do, if I'm doing my job correctly, right, it will get you to make those words more concise. It will focus in what you're really trying to get at by posing those questions. So that's something that, you know, kind of to look forward to as we go forward. Are there any questions that you guys have for me?
Yes, I had a question. Is it okay if for next week I join Monday's class just because I won't be available on Wednesday?
Yeah, that's cool. That's one of the reasons why I break it up like that. So that way you can jump into whatever day works best for you. But just know as it gets to the end of the semester, like if you're replaced in group A, you have to go to group A just because we're gonna have group projects. And I divided the class in half. So that way it's even amount of people in the groups, right? So just keep that in mind. But as of now, I don't, for anybody, right? If you can't make Wednesday, jump into Monday. I have no problem with that ever. Also, just if anything comes up, because I know we're still in the pandemic, right? We're still battling this COVID. Just contact me, let me know what's up. So that way I'm in the loop and we'll find a way to accommodate you. Other than that, you guys, any other questions?
Do you think we're gonna be by campus by next year or not? Or you don't know?
I don't know. They were saying it would be fall. We would be back in person. But I think what happened is like the second variant of the COVID-19 kind of hit. So now they're repositioning and kind of regrouping as to if that will be a possibility or not. You know, I would rather be able to meet with you guys in person, but I don't want to risk the health of my family or your guys' family by trying to, you know, do something that is really unnecessary, right? Like if we could do this, you could still get the information and be safe. Why not continue to do that? That's just me talking, right? I don't know what.
No, you're right though. I agree.
Yeah. But again, even as your professor, right? I would prefer to be able to do this in person. I think it's a lot more that we could glean from these conversations. But at the end of the day, for me, health is a priority, right? Like, and I'm sure you guys got, you know, abuelas, you got the grandmothers, you got the grandfathers that you just can't afford to have them catch that, right? Same with me. My pops has autoimmune disease. I don't want him to be able to suffer through that because and really, let's call it what it is, right? All that shit is about money, right? Them to try their desire to push us to campus, that's a money move, right? So let's not be about money. Let's be about what's really for the health of the people. Let's keep it myotic, right? Like let's do what's in harmony with nature. Let's do what's in harmony with the universe. Let's do what's in harmony with society, right? Any other questions?
Professor, I did have a question, but
Yeah.
like about the reading.
Yeah.
It's probably a dumb question,
Nah,
or
never.
probably paying attention, but like this reading, well, the one that we just read, was it before Christ or was it after?
So it was written after Christ. So the actual publication, I want to say, it might have been in the 2000s, but they're dealing with material that were before Christ. So in reality, if you think about our, this is produced in 2006. But if you think about last week's reading, right, the teachers of Ptah-hotep, and they said that we could locate that around 2500 BC, right? So that's way before Christ. So those teachings were produced out of Kemetic and Ma'atan society, right? So I would say even this concept of Ma'at predates the teachings of Ptah-hotep. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. No, yeah, that's what I was asking. Not about like the actual reading, but like what they were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is way, way, way before Christ. Absolutely. In fact, even the term Christ, right? It derived from the term Krest, K-R-S-T. So one thing with Kemet, they don't really deal with vowels, how we understand vowels to be. So the actual spelling of Kemet, even though I spell it K-E-M-E-T just for our language, is actually K-M-T, right? It's Kemet. So the term Krest, K-R-S-T, was the original term for Christ. And all that means is to be one with God, right? So we talked about Imhotep. He was recognized as a Karast, one who was one with Christ, because he was able to go from a physical being to be recognized as a demigod, right? Akhenaten, he was recognized as someone who was Karast, one with Christ. In the theological tradition of Kemet, they have the story of Heru, Asar, and Aset. Heru is like so just like how Christians have Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, the Comedists had Asar, Aset, and Heru. Heru would be Jesus. Asar would be Joseph or God, right? And then Aset would be the Mary figure, right? So all of these things predate Christianity by millennium. And really a good resource is Ashwakwezi. He breaks all of this down very, very fundamentally. So if you want to kind of get a little bit deeper into that's a great place to start. But good question. Anybody else?
Yes, I attended the Zoom meeting last night for the Liberating Town Hall.
Okay.
So do I just write a journal on that eventually?
Yeah, just write a journal. You could either give it to me when you write it or submit it with your journal and just, notify me that you submitted the extra credit as well. So that I could give you credit for that.
All right. Thank you.
How was the event? I didn't get a chance to attend.
It was good. I enjoyed it. I had to leave early because I had work, but I enjoyed it.
All right,
It was fun.
Cool. Anybody else? Y'all funny though. Everybody had questions when it's time to go. I'm trying to pull teeth for questions. Everybody's silent, but now it's time to go home. Everybody coming out to ask a question. It's all good. Y'all have a good weekend. Be safe, be healthy, get water, get exercise, get some sun. Wear your mask. They say wear 2 masks. Really is a better way, especially if you're wearing like the cloth ones. The 2 masks is really the way to go. Other than that, be well. Text me, email me if you guys need anything, and I will see you next Wednesday. Peace.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.